Hello, Garland Nixon here, an amateur cynic. I'm only an amateur because I still try to be positive a little bit too much, and it always comes up to bite me in the behind. But luckily, I have a professional cynic, Mark Sleboda, and we got plenty to talk about. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here with Mark Sleboda. He is an internationally known cynic, but more importantly, he's a security analyst, and he's operating out of Moscow. And Mark knows what's happening. I've been leaning on him for many years to get the insider scoop from Russia, and he understands, being that he was born American, he understands the culture here, and maybe that's why he left. But at any rate, we always have a lot of great conversations. So do me a favor right now, if you guys can, and girls, please go to X right now and share this so people can see this live, and then just come back there, or just open another window or something. Everybody needs to see this live. This is going to be great. But share this on all your social media platforms, and make sure you smash that like button. And we got lots to talk about, a lot of things. Well, let's start here. Russia has an alliance. We're going to have to hit them all. Russia has built this alliance with South Korea. Excuse me, North Korea. Yeah, I did one of the Koreas. So North Korea, obviously. Well,
West Korea.
Yeah, exactly. Ideally, it should be unified. That's what I'm striving for. But at any rate, with Trump coming in and him having made crazy talk of getting a deal, or at least talking with the people in North Korea, the madness of talking with people, of diplomatic discussion with North Korea, I think the neocons lost their mind, and they said, what the hell, let's just go ahead and do there what we've already done in Ukraine and would probably like to do in the United States. And I'm not sure that they won't do it before January 20th, is let's go all the way to military dictatorship. So you've heard all the stories about this. The guy, the so-called president of South Korea, of coming to Joe Biden and serenading him with bye-bye. Was it with what was it?
Bye, Miss American.
Oh, that was so ugly. Everybody should go on YouTube and see that. Is so horrible. In fact, I'll put it like this. I went to this Korean cultural center, and they were, talking about peace and reunification. And when I brought that up, they were like, they were like, cringe. Like the most embarrassing thing that any Korean person has ever done in history was that. At any rate, so they decide they're going to go full, hey, let's just do what we want to do because we are fascists. And as soon as it happened, I said, it's got Tony Blinken's fingerprints all over it. Now, Mark Sleboda, from the vantage point you have in Moscow, give me your thoughts and opinions on the attempted, would you call it even a coup? I don't know what the hell you'd call it, but what happened in South Korea?
Garland, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show. And to all of you out there, forget the blue pill, forget the red pill. We're going with the black pill, baby. Oh, yeah. Swallow that baby. Professional cynic. Let me paraphrase Diogenes. I am a dog who bites also his friends in order to save them. South Korea. When we're talking about the internationalization of the conflict in Ukraine, how it has become a global conflict, right? You want to call it World War III? I'm fully on board with that reading to a certain extent. But South Korea and North Korea have already been significantly involved in this conflict, and the first part of this was South Korea. South Korea transferred hundreds of thousands of artillery shells to the U.S., which passed them on immediately to Ukraine. It was understood, right? And that is actually the artillery shells that the Kiev regime used for their failed summer NATO proxy offensive in Ukraine's south in 2023. Right, those were South Korean art, because NATO was already tapped out at that point. Right, they were producing, monthly production. That's what they had. Their stocks were already out at that point. So South Korea came to the rescue, and after that, Russia said, "Well, if you're going to bring South Korea into this, well, there's another Korea, and they got a lot more artillery shells than South Korea does, because that's what they do is artillery." And they're compatible with Russian shells. So Russia cut an agreement that was also compounded with a new mutual, a strategic partnership that had a mutual defense clause, essentially making it equivalent to NATO Article 5, right? Mutual defense treaty. And so North Korea put their artillery stocks, but also their artillery production, at least according to the Western media. Russia and North Korea still deny it, but I think it's one of those, where they feel they have to deny it. But I don't know about North Korean ballistic missiles. That's also been mentioned. I've never seen any evidence presented. I'm not against the idea. If you want more ballistic missiles, I'm not opposed to using North Korean, but I haven't seen any evidence of them. Also, there's the possibility that North Korea has transferred some of their multiple launch rocket systems, right? Equivalent and supposedly in some degree superior to the HIMARS, the American HIMARS, or the Russian Tornado. Also, I would not be opposed to trying some of those babies out, but I haven't seen any evidence of it yet. Now, I know there's all this propaganda in the West about North Korean soldiers engaged in Kursk and fighting, and it's, Sixth Sense. I see North Korean people and every Russian in uniform who has an Asian cast to their feature. Oh, they must really be North Korean, not Buryats or Chukchi or any of other Russia's Asian ethnicities.
One thing, did you see the AI picture where I think it was one of the British papers? They said they received some fall. Yeah, and they took pictures of just like two Russian female soldiers, and they AI'd them into like Asian look and turned them into North Koreans.
Two girls from Donbass, actually.
Yeah,
right. That have been part of the resistance there for years, and they just badly tried to make them look North Korean, and the Daily Mail pressed it. But there's been no evidence of North Korea. Now, I have no doubt that there are North Korean soldiers somewhere in Russia, right? They just signed a mutual defense treaty. They need to start training together. They're working on the military operability that will take years to build, right? Russia and China have been doing military drills regularly every other month or so for years now to build that. That's what NATO does, and NATO still has problems, which is one of the reasons why North Korean troops would not be used, is because Russia hasn't worked with them since well before the fall of the self-dissolution of the Soviet Union in 91. So not only does Russia not need the manpower, they have plenty of volunteer contract soldiers, 20 to 30,000 or so every month signing up. But it would just, in military terms, it would be a disaster in a complex conflict like this. So they're not needed. They're not being used. This is all Western propaganda started by the Kiev regime, but then carried through on the West because they couldn't admit that it was all that the Kiev regime was just lying. All of this is just pretext and justification for the Kiev regime to demand, once again, what they've already been demanding from NATO. And they did get part of it, right? It worked. It worked as a pretext, it's referred to as to allow long-range strikes. It's not allowing anything. The U.S. is firing ballistic missiles into Russia, right? But it was done if you according to the accounts, right, because of the supposed presence of North Korean soldiers in the Kursk area. It's nonsense. It's
One quick
complete.
question, Mark, and I had this question. I recall reading a while back that they were firing ATACMS missiles at Russia. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's like we may fire, and I remember thinking, well, wait a minute, I've seen them fire attack. I mean, am I wrong? Did something change?
No. They fired them at Crimea. They fired them at Donbass, right? They've been firing them for over a year. They're not a new weapon. It's simply that they haven't been used in Russia proper.
Oh, okay.
The Russian international until a month ago, right now, and then and the same thing with the Storm Shadows. Russia has already built an air defense and electronic warfare profile for these weapons, right? 60-70% of the time, they're going to bring them down whenever they have air defense and electronic warfare. This latest salvo of 6 ATACMS missiles, 4 of them were brought down effortlessly with electronic warfare. 2 of them shot, kind of last minute with Panzer air defense systems, but that's 6 for 6, right? With no evidence of any other of significant damage done. So this ATACMS it's a pinprick at best.
I've seen a lot of instances where some of them get shot down, and maybe the last couple ones get hit and kind of flutter into whatever
debris. If you shoot down a missile, right? This has been part of, whenever the Kiev regime attempts to shoot things down, its own air defense missiles, and when they do score a hit, the missiles they hit then fall down on buildings, and Russia's attacking apartment buildings, right? It happens. It's part of a part of war. But this ATACMS is no game changer. The Pentagon themselves admitted that. They said the Pentagon made clear they did not want to do this, right? They're not making any more ATACMS, right? And the Pentagon wants all of the ATACMS saved for what they regard as an inevitable war with China in just a few years. And they're very, very worried about a short and intermediate range conventional missile gap, because that is going to be a naval and air war fought primarily with missiles and drones, right? In the Taiwanese Straits and the South China Sea, and they want all the missiles they can for this. So this was literally Biden prying 50 ATACMS missiles out of the Pentagon's hands, right? They did not want to do it. Pentagon said it's not going to change anything on the battlefield. Russia's already, has a profile of these weapons. They've moved their airfields that they're operating out of to conduct glide bomb attacks out of our range. It's not going to do anything. It's a political provocation. That's really what it is. So back to the North Koreans, right? There's no North Koreans. An article out in the BBC talked to it last week, talked about Kiev regime troops trying to hold on in the Kursk region in which they can't hold on. But they specifically asked them, among other things, about the North Korean soldiers. And they're like, nope, never heard of them, never saw them, never heard of them. And then one of them commented at the end there, and he was saying, yes, it can be very hard to find a North Korean soldier in the dark forests of Kursk at night, especially when they're not there. Right? So even the Ukrainian soldiers on the ground admit that there's no North Korean soldiers, that this was all a propaganda thing. But there has been, I believe, a big push by the U.S. as they attempt to try to continue to provide arms and ammunition to the Kiev regime of the type it can use to try to bring South Korea into this in a bigger way. South Korea actually has a very large and growing military industrial complex. A lot of people don't know this. South Korea has been working to position themselves as a major military exporter for years now. Poland has just, in the last couple of years, has just been put in orders for hundreds of tanks, self-propelled howitzers, and other military vehicles from South Korea. And so what we believe that happened there, as you pointed out, the South Korean president is a flaming McCarthyite, communist-hating, pro-American, bye-bye Miss American Pie whack job, right? You know, a neocons proxy extraordinaire. And, you know, his government, his defense minister is all in on this. However, the South Korean parliament right now is dominated by the leftish opposition party. And they don't want to get more involved in the Ukrainian conflict. Right? They point out that, well, you escalate against Russia, Russia's going to hand more weapons, more advanced technologies to the North Koreans, right? You know, we don't want to go down that escalation path. So they don't want to send South Koreans to die. They don't want to, you know, get further involved in this conflict. So what I believe happened is there was an attempt by the president to declare martial law, shut down the parliament, and take de facto dictatorial control of South Korea, which is actually nothing new because South Korea has essentially been a dictatorship for most of its existence, right? A nationalist dictatorship. It was only in the late 80s that they actually started, you know, somewhat real elections, a lot like Japan, actually, in many ways. But so they wanted to get around the parliament that was opposing this. And I believe that this is what this martial law declaration was really about. And it failed. People came out, protesters, you know, in support. He did not get the response, I think, from the rest of the military and from South Korean society that he wanted. And the attempt was quickly shut down. The parliament dismissed the attempt at martial law. The military kind of went one way, the other way, and then they have effectively sided with the parliament. And so the South Korean defense minister fell on his sword, almost literally. So he took the blame for it. He says, I suggested it to the South Korean president. It's my fault, not his. And so he was arrested. There was an immediate attempt to impeach the president. That failed because his party stood by him then, although I understand they're going to keep trying and keep doing it and pushing it. And there's growing. The polls all show the majority of South Korean people think he should be gone at this point. But then the South Korean defense minister attempted to kill himself in detention. He tried to hang himself. He failed, evidently. But, you know, when I say fall on your sword, it wasn't actually, you know, with a sword. It was with a noose instead. But it's essentially the same thing. So this is really a crazy affair. But ultimately, what I believe it was all about is the U.S. was trying to get South Korea's military-industrial complex to start pumping out gear and artillery shells in a major way for the Kiev regime, and it appears to have failed.
I have also heard from a source who I would think probably has pretty good inside info that there was some kind of a provocation going on with North Korea at the time, and that let's just say the way they saved him was there was a whole lot of money handed out in the South Korean parliament, which is notoriously corrupt. And let's face it, as soon as you say it's a U.S. colony, you don't have to say you've already said that it's notoriously corrupt. You know what I mean? It's like going to the island, like, you know, go to the Virgin Islands or any of these U.S. Virgin Islands. You don't, as soon as you talk to the people, they're like, yes, our government's terribly corrupt. Yeah, it's a U.S. colony. That's given, you know, that's how they control them. Anyway.
South Korea keeps flying drones over North Korea. That's part of the pretext. Sometimes they're reconnaissance. Other times they've been dropping leaflets. And every time they've been doing it, North Korea has responded in a rather unusual way. they have been filling balloons with sewage, with literal feces and garbage, and then flying the balloons back over South Korea. You know, you send garbage propaganda leaflets on drones over to our side. We're gonna send feces back to you, because that's essentially what you're defecating on us. We will literally defecate on you. It's amusing. It's an interesting North Korean symmetric response that I found interesting.
You gotta love that kind of humor. All right, let's now shift to Syria. What's interesting about Syria is, and it's with so many of these things, here's what I've learned, Mark. Wait a couple weeks. The first day you heard this happened, and this is the way it is, right? And as days go by and weeks go by, and oh, they're going to attack the Russian base, they're going to blow them up. Now I'm hearing that HTS is talking with the Russians, and that the Russians may keep their bases. I'm hearing a lot of things differently than the first day, which was all assumptions the first couple of days. Now I'm hearing more, and I'm sure as time goes, things will get more and more clear. Where are we now? Here we are, a little bit more time out, but where are we now from the initial phase and the initial reports to where we are right now? Your thoughts?
Okay, so Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is de facto in control of the part of the country that was under Syrian government control, 2/3 of the country. That being said, their control really isn't so much control. Most of their jihadis are looting and raping their way through the country right now. The summary executions of Syrian military and government officials, the torture, the killing, the persecution of the religious minorities, the Alawites, the Shia, the Druze, the Kurds, the Christians, is commencing. There's dozens and dozens of videos out there. And keep in mind that these are videos that the jihadis make themselves because they're proud of what they're doing. Imagine what's happening that is not being video,
kind of
right?
like the Banderites. Just like the Banderites, you know what I mean? They
worse,
slaughter and murder innocent people. But I'm just saying it's worse, but I'm just saying that same fascist mentality.
Same mentality. So, I mean, but there really isn't any Syrian government right now. There's no one operating border controls. There's no one doing the business of governance of the country right now. The Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is Al-Qaeda, right? They're just rebranded Al-Qaeda. Even the U.S. has admitted they're just rebranded Al-Qaeda. The U.S., the UK, the UN, everyone still lists them as a terrorist organization, despite the fact that the Secretary General of the United Nations was joining in celebrating the fall of the government. I'm like, who did they fall to? A group that even the UN, wait for it, the UN itself recognizes as a terrorist organization. But, hey, we're in the realm of Jake, Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria, Sullivan, and that was years ago. That was almost a decade ago. Now it's just done openly. And the whitewashing and apologia of Giuliani and the jihadists to try to, we won and Al-Qaeda took control of Syria, but we're gonna see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil about what is really going on. It's all woke Al-Qaeda and diversity-friendly jihadis and all of this ridiculous nonsense. The parliament and the constitution have been suspended. The quote-unquote transitional government that has been declared, it's so diverse that every single member of it is a member of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Not even the other 31 flavors of jihad in Idlib and the Syrian National Army, the Turkish proxy force, everything. No, they're all Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. There's no transsexuals, there's no women, there's no Christians or Kurds or Shia or nope, it's all Sunni Salafist Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. So much for your your diversity friendly jihadis.
So they're probably not going to have a Pride Day. Their Pride Day will be cutting off the heads of all the gay people. That's what they'll consider.
Yeah,
Pride
well,
Day.
I've seen the videos of the Alawites' corpses being dragged behind cars and lots of other things that are unspeakable. The biggest, there's lots of losses here, but by far the greatest tragedy is for the Syrian people who aren't themselves Sunni Islamists. And it has to be said that these jihadi groups have been at each other's throats in Idlib for years. To think that that's not going to be repeated now, that Erdogan isn't already looking at the U.S. and Kurdish-controlled territory in the east, saying, well, I want the Kurds gone, and I want that oil and wheat, by the way, that the U.S. is sitting on. This is not the end. This is just the beginning of a new phase. It was a three-way Mexican standoff. In a way, it still is a three-way Mexican standoff. But what had been the largest player, the Syrian government, backed by Russia and Iran and Hezbollah, has been just wiped off the board. And what we have instead is Israel has poked their head in. Now as well. They've fully taken control of the Golan Heights, Mount Hebron, some surrounding villages, and now there's been a appeal, a declaration by 6 Druze, a minority, villages in the south of Syria, begging to be annexed by Israel, so they don't have to live under Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. That's just how crazy the situation is there right now. Israel has been conducting probably the most massive airstrikes they've ever conducted anywhere on Syria, right? We're talking over 300 airstrikes on the first half a day, right? They are completely destroying the Syrian military, which has, most of it was of Russian provenance or Soviet provenance, right? Soviet, then Russian. And I have to say that Russia is probably quietly appreciative of this, because the alternative is all of these weapons falling into the hands of Al-Qaeda. Do we really want an Al-Qaeda navy on the Mediterranean? Do we really want Al-Qaeda with air defense systems capable of bringing down airplanes and fighter jets and the like, tanks and howitzers, and whatever they couldn't operate, one, they could transfer to their Turkish masters. And you can imagine that whatever public statements and pretending that Turkey hasn't really been involved in this was 90% Erdogan. And the Russian government is quietly seething beneath their fake diplomatic smiles. And they certainly don't want their weapons transferred to the Turks. And we've received word that the Americans are trying to come in and buy up all of this military equipment so they can send it to Ukraine. So Russia is probably, they're definitely glad to see it being destroyed at this point. Anything that they couldn't secure, right away, they're happy to see it destroyed. And I'm going to guess there's every possibility that they are actually cooperating with the Israelis, providing coordinates, locations, satellite data, because once again, better the Israelis destroy it than Al-Qaeda or Ukraine or whoever, or Erdogan gets control of it. So that may shock a lot of people, but at this point, everyone that Russia backed is gone, and Al-Qaeda is in control of the country. And right now, Erdogan, who, this is really complicated to not only to understand, but even to explain. Russia and Iran on one side and Turkey on the other have had a relationship that is very hard for a lot of people to understand in the last few years. They have agreed to separate their international diplomacy and their trade and economic activity with each other, which is quite extensive, from their geopolitical differences, meaning military, proxy wars, and the like, in Libya, in Syria, and in Armenia, Azerbaijan. So Erdogan, there's no question that he betrayed the Astana Accords. As far as I'm concerned, the Kremlin and the Iranian government have egg on their face for ever believing they could trust Erdogan. I spoke out against the Astana Accords. They were signed. I said, it's another Minsk Accords, and we're going to regret it. Well, we're at that point now. But, what it is, Russia is still not breaking relations with Turkey. They're going to continue economic cooperation. They're going to continue dialogue. And the Turks have given the orders to the jihadis, to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, you don't touch the Russian military bases. You don't touch the Russians. We don't want to provoke them any more than they're already provoked, right? And Turkey may actually want the Russians' bases to stay there because the Americans are still active in East Syria, and now the Israelis have some kind of intentions in South Syria. And the Turks may feel that the Russian presence, however contained now in Syria, might still play to their advantage geopolitically. Now, that's an open question. The Russian government, I'm sure, is right now debating. Do we really want to try to keep these bases in an al-Qaeda-controlled country with all the leverage this will give them and Turkey over us? I don't know. That's their call. I would not. I would be getting those. And I've heard discussion originally that they were immediately, going to start working on evacuating those bases. It may still happen, but evidently there's also talking going beyond the scenes. So I don't know. Those bases were useful for Russian projection into the Med, for logistics to Russian operations in Africa, but they're not necessary, right? And now that the Syrian government is gone and there's not there to defend, right? The Syrian Arab army was obviously, the Syrian economy was crippled, right? It was hollowed out by Western sanctions, by the U.S. occupation, sitting on Syria's oil and gas. I mean, Damascus had 4 hours of electricity. The capital had 4 hours of electricity a day. There was rationing. There was malnutrition in Syria, right? The economy was 15% of what it had been in 2010, right? A Syrian army officer was making $30 to $50 a month max, while one of the jihadis on the Turkish payroll was making $1,500 a month. And it's quite obvious that on top of all of this economic misery and no hope for a better future, that there was a massive subversion, co-option campaign by some combination of Western and Turkish intelligence. They against the Syrian military officers, the generals, some of the Syrian political and bureaucratic administration, clan leaders. It was all bribery, buying out, blackmail, threats, right? We can get you and your family out of the country, set up in a third country, whatever it takes. And this is actually what the U.S. did in Iraq in 2003. It's why there was relatively low fighting and most of the Iraqi military stood down. It was also done in Libya at the end when the military force in charge of defending the capital city just stood down and opened up the gates. It's very effective, right? The Russian and Iranians were aware of a jihadi offensive. The Russian government had started major airstrikes back in the middle of October on Idlib, right? Drones, airstrikes, drone strikes, helicopters. They were doing what they could with what was a reduced contingent. The Iranians had a reduced contingent at Assad's request over the last few years. They were wanting to send troops back in. The Iraqi Popular Mobilization Units, the Shiites, they were ready to come back in. Hezbollah had signed the ceasefire with Israel, and they were going to send troops back in. But the Syrian army just folded, right? Not all of it. The Tiger Force still fought. The 4th Division fought. But everyone else, the generals ordered their troops to withdraw, stand down, change out of your clothes, drop your weapons, leave all your tanks, and disperse and go back home. And there's countless videos of Russian soldiers walking through fields of abandoned military clothing, guns, right? This isn't stuff that was left in the middle of a battlefield by troops fleeing in the middle of the night because they didn't want to fight. They were ordered en masse to stand down by their own generals. There was very little fighting. This wasn't a military end to the Syrian conflict. It was a regime change operation. And while the Russians and Iranians were aware of the offensive, I believe that their intelligence failed to detect the amount of subversion and co-option that was going on. And that's why it came to such a shock and happened so fast before they could do anything to get people back in there and bolster things. So it's a big loss to Russia in terms of international prestige, the respect, the influence they had gained over the last few years in the Middle East, potentially the military bases. Iran, it's an even bigger loss, of course, because they're in that region, right? Their supply lines to Hezbollah are now, I don't know what they're going to do. I mean, they're obviously going to be severely reduced. This is going to make the Palestinians more vulnerable. There's going to be nothing holding Netanyahu back now from finishing off Gaza and the West Bank. So big losers, Russia, Iran, Palestine, above all, the Syrian people, that aren't Sunni Islamists, the Christians, the Alawites, the Shia, the Druze, everything. But at the end of the day, however a blow it is to Russia, Russia can walk away from this, right? That Kenny Rogers song, The Gambler, right? You got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, and know when to run. Russia lost this one, right? But it was an important interest, but not a crucial national interest. And there's already people in Russia saying, look, what did we waste all of this for? Why are we playing around in the Middle East? We always should have been focused above all and foremost on Ukraine. We doubled down on the conflict that's far more important to us, the one we're actually winning. And yes, everything we built in all the foundations we built in the sands of the desert have been reclaimed by the desert sands. That's what happens, right?
I'll add this, and that is, I always say countries that like a civilization like Russia that's been around 1,000 years. A, it ain't been around 1,000 years because they're stupid and do stupid things. And B, Iran, Russia, China, these are long-term, thousands of years. They have a different calendar. Whereas like Jake Sullivan or whoever, they're like, well, we only got a month, so let's cause as much chaos as we can in the land. They got a very short calendar. The Russians are like, and I looked at it and I'm like, yeah, you just set up a bunch of jihadis next door. Erdogan, Israel, I have a feeling one day you're going to look back and say, yeah, this probably wasn't a good idea. The time will come when the losers will be the ones who are, you don't want those guys next door. If I were Saudi Arabia, I'd be worried. Those people, it's an incubator for help. You know damn well they're going to be cooking up a scheme to overthrow the government of Saudi Arabia and any of the other Sunni governments. They're going to have plans for attack.
Also, the Gulf states, Saudi, the UAE, they don't want Turkey in charge, as a huge regional power in the Middle East, right? They don't have fond memories of the Ottoman Empire the way Erdogan does. They don't remember it the same way, right? So they actually came to appreciate Russian stabilization of Syria as limiting Turkish influence in the Middle East. And now that's gone. So, yeah, Russia has less influence, but they may revisit their role in Syria to counter Turkey now, right? That's a real possibility. It may be just diplomatically and economically, but maybe they'll put some money in some troops' hands, right? Some weapons. Some unsatisfied population that has been left out. Who knows? But the conflict in Syria is not over. It just has entered a new phase. And the poor Syrian people, of course, they deserve better, but they're not going to get it. Syria is going to be a failed and broken and probably fractured state. Humpty Dumpty fell off the wall. You're never going to be able to put it together again. It's going to end up like Libya. Which is another hallmark.
Let's get closer back to Moscow. This is a big one. My evaluation now, though I don't think that their color revolution in Tbilisi in Georgia has been successful. I think that's getting more and more obvious.
No, it doesn't look like it.
Fill me in. Yeah. Where are we in Georgia? Other than
the Georgian Dream government, which again, they are not a pro-Russian party. They are just not a rabidly anti-Russian party. They're pragmatic. What they wanted was good relations, trade relations, diplomatic relations with both Russia and the West. They're not going to get it, right? Because the West is, you're either with us or not. They wanted a second front against Ukraine and against Russia during the Ukraine conflict. And the Georgian Dream government, whatever their issues with Russia, and they have issues with Russia, right? They didn't want to be Western proxies in another war with Russia, right? And so that was the attempt. That has been the attempt to overthrow the Georgian Dream government in the aftermath of elections that they clearly won. Even the OSCE had to give that election a clean bill of health. This Georgian president is actually, she just became Georgian. She was not only a French citizen, she was literally the French ambassador to Georgia, Salome Zorovichvili. She has become kind of the figurehead for this fractured pro-Western opposition. And, they've been carrying on protests for several weeks now, but the Georgian Dream government seems to have things in hands. The security forces, the military, the police, the intelligence are all still firmly behind the government, and the protests are getting smaller and smaller. There have been talk, in fact, they actually have a group of the opposition leaders on camera saying, we need some corpses. People are stopped coming. We need some dead people, like was arranged, ironically enough, by Georgian snipers working for the far right, for the right sector.
Don't they have like a Georgian group called the Georgian
Legion? The Georgian
Ukraine, a bunch of fascists.
Yeah. So, but anyway, it hasn't happened yet. We'll see if they go down to that extreme, but they might have to do it because right now it appears that they're simply running out of steam. And if they can't maintain the energy, well, then, there's really no hope for it. And, the Georgian Dream prime minister, the prime minister is the most powerful. The presidency is a symbolic office. The prime minister is the important office in that country. Not only has he said that there won't be another Maidan, that we will, but he said, I will not be Yanukovych, who was the Ukrainian president who showed weakness in the face of the protests back in Ukraine in 2013, 2014, and eventually agreed to stand the police down, which just led to the Banderites just seizing total control of Kiev at that time. In what was supposed to be a EU brokered power sharing agreement. But again, you never trust anything the West signs as having any validity. You never trust them on anything, except from a position of absolute strength. Another broken agreement. Georgia looks firm now. They're going to stay out. They're having moderate economic growth in the country after, look at Georgia's biggest products are its wine. They're one of the old, if not the oldest, wine producing country in the world. They make excellent wine and excellent cuisine and sparkling water. And their biggest purchasers of these things are Russia. And actually, there is a very large Georgian diaspora, hundreds of thousands in Russia that live here and work here and transfer money back home. The restoration of normal economic relations with Russia has led to, an economic recovery, however, modest in Georgia, when much of the rest of the region in the world is going in the opposite direction. So they don't want to risk that. They don't want to risk another war with Russia. Again, they just wanted to have relations with everyone, and the West can't accept that. So their EU ascension path has been ended. Their NATO admittance has been ended, right? The West made an open attempt, at another Maidan in Georgia this time. So, it's you're either with us and you serve as we want you to serve, proxy, not as you wish to serve. That's the mentality of the West. And what they're actually doing is pushing Georgia and the Georgian Dream Party back into Russian hands. But, again, you win some, you lose some. So that one, I don't want to say Russia's winning it because they're only by default winning it, right? It's Georgia that is winning in Georgia. All right. And it is the West that is losing.
All right. Let's get to the Trump thing. Couple of things. It's getting pretty obvious to me, as if I didn't know it. I think Trump hates Zelensky's guts.
There's no question about that.
I think he hates his guts. I think
of course he did.
I mean, disdain for him.
The Ukraine was intimately involved in everything that led to his impeachment and all these scandals that were brought against him. There's no question of that.
And not only that, the whole MAGA universe. You know what I mean? Not just Trump. Someone asked me something about, will Trump flip? I said, let me tell you something. Trump's got a lot of capital. But in the United States, you start talking to the MAGA sphere, the MAGA people, they know Ukraine. You talk to them like, oh, yeah, let me tell you what happened. They are, interestingly enough. And when I hear Trump say things that sounds like, oh, well, why would he say that? I'm like, he knows the truth. If the MAGA people, and the MAGA people they hate it. They want, now whether they can get it or not. But here's my question. Here's what I got to throw at you. A couple of things happened. Trump said at some point, yeah, we'd like to get a deal and China could be involved. Medvedev, who is the bad cop of all bad cops, he's always said, we ought to just blow these bastards up. He goes to China and he says, we could do something. Maybe China could talk and be involved, right? Orban, he's an intermediary. I know you're a cynic and me too. And I just feel like, how would they ever get a deal? It's obvious talking is better than anything else. And it seems to me that there's intermediaries going on and there's people that are making an effort here. I got to say, I think they're making an effort. Your thoughts on everything that's going on? Oh, right. The attackums get thrown at Russia. And it's obvious the neocons are trying to provoke they want them to shoot at NATO bases or something. They're trying to, these massive provocations. And Trump comes out and says, screw that, man. I ain't down with that. Bad idea. Let's not do this. A lot of things going on. Your thoughts on this whole dynamic, Mark?
Yeah, Trump has also said that he won't abandon Ukraine and that he wants EU troops on the ground in Ukraine. So, let's say that there are shades going on here. My opinion on a Trump deal is, God, I hope not. Right? There's only one thing that can preserve the Kiev regime at this point. Russia is winning handily on the battlefield, right? They can go all the way to Kiev and remove this regime and go further to the Polish border if they need to. The only thing that can save that regime right now is a Trump-pushed deal, if for some unimaginable and ununderstandable reason the Russian government agreed to it. Now, I don't believe that Russia will accept any deal that Trump will offer, right? Everything that Trump is saying, Russia has already said multiple. We're not interested in a ceasefire. We don't want a ceasefire. Why would we give you time to rearm and retrain this regime? We're winning now, right? We don't want to fight this war again in 2 years or 3 years or 5 years. We are going to win, and you are going to agree to our terms, and that's it, right? You don't understand. The Trump administration is now the president of the United States, and the United States is a party to this conflict, right? They, in fact, are on the losing side of this conflict. They don't get to pitch a deal. They don't get to dictate terms. Russia has put out their terms. If the Trump administration doesn't accept Russia's terms, and I don't believe there's I don't believe there's any way that any U.S. president could accept the loss, because ultimately they're still the U.S. president, and the U.S. has invested so much money and so much geopolitical capital, and made so many ridiculous statements about how the whole rest of the world will fall if Russia wins, and cats and dogs will live together on the street, and China will take back Taiwan, and Iran will wipe out Israel.
And drinking vodka and speaking.
Yeah,
Russian,
all this ridiculous postmodern domino theory nonsense. But anyway, does Trump want to be remembered as the man who gave Ukraine to Vladimir Putin? Because that's the way he would be paid. Maybe he doesn't love Ukraine, but ultimately he doesn't love the Kiev regime. He doesn't love Zelensky. But ultimately,
the MAGA people won out. I'll say this: they won out.
Who cares what the MAGA people want? Why would Trump care what the MAGA people want?
Yeah.
He's been elected. He can't run for office again. He doesn't care.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry. The U.S. population has never had any say in U.S. foreign policy. Yeah. And they certainly don't now.
And when I say the MAGA people, I'm not just talking about, I'll put it like this. I think Trump really wants out. But again,
Trump also wanted out of Syria.
Yeah. And
he wanted out of Afghanistan, and he couldn't get either of those either.
Yeah. In fact, he told them to take the troops out, and they just ignored him.
Yes.
So this is going to be interesting, Mark, for this reason. If, as I suspect, Trump really does want out, and everything points to it, he wants out. He hates, and they tried to stab him. A big part of, I think, what's driving Trump now is they tried to screw me. They tried to sue me. They tried to put me in jail. They tried to Russiagate me. And I think Trump wants some revenge. And part of that he wants revenge on is he sees Syria, accurately sees Ukraine. It was a tool that was used against their enemies.
Yes.
And he was one of their enemies. And just
politically, domestically, yes.
Just as much as they hated Putin, and they used Ukraine as a weapon against a political and military tool against Putin, and they used it as an intelligence tool against Trump. And he's furious. Now, again, what we're going to see now is a president, provided that he ever becomes president, a president who wants one thing and the machine wants the other. That's going to be interesting to watch.
Yeah, it is.
It's going to be that dynamic is going to be interesting to watch.
Trump wants two things, right? One, so he's not at all interested in Ukraine. He wants the Ukraine problem to go away. I don't think it will go away, or it can go away, right? He just doesn't want to deal with it. So he's probably going to, there's talk that he wants to delegate it to J.D. Vance, etc. But Trump just wants to not hear about Ukraine. He wants two things, right? He's made it clear that he wants regime change in Iran, right? He wants, to achieve it by economic means, economically strangle them. But then all the covert stuff, like just happened in Syria, will be targeted on Iran, that sort of thing, right? So, but he is, even more pro-Israeli than the Biden administration, and he actually gets along with Netanyahu, right? So, again, there's only three flavors of U.S. foreign policy elite, blah, political, right? They all want war with Russia, China, and Iran to cement and maintain U.S.-led Western global hegemony. The only difference is they prioritize each of those conflicts differently, right? That's the difference between politicians. And this crew of neocons that Trump has willingly surrounded himself with are Iran hawks, and to a lesser extent China hawks, but they're not, for the most part, other than Rubio, anti-Russia hawks. So that's one thing that Trump wants. He wants to ignore Ukraine. He wants to regime change Iran. But he also, the other war Trump wants is against the deep state, right? The permanent bureaucracy that brought the war against him, right? So he's brought in as many people. They're neocons for the most part, right? But they're kind of C-list neocons. They're outside of the mainstream establishment that they haven't achieved a lot of hierarchical success in previously. So he thinks they'll be more loyal to him than to the establishment, right? So Trump wants to wage war domestically in the U.S. against that establishment. He wants revenge internally in the United States.
Yep, he's going to own his enemies. Yeah, I'm with you too. It's funny because people are
that's why the Biden administration is talking about blanket pardons for everyone in the Biden administration government. Because while they've been bringing all these lawsuits against Trump and Trump's people, back to Robert Flynn and everything else and all these lawsuits, Trump's going to turn right around and bring lawsuits against everyone that he can from the Biden administration
and the leakers,
the bureaucracy that has been supporting him and so forth, which is why Merrick Garland stood down already.
And Ray, FBI, the rats are jumping off a sinking ship. That's for sure. Yep. And he's, I agree with you. He wants to smite his enemies. And you know what? I'll be honest. If they did it to me for 5 years, 7, 8 years, whatever it was, I can't fault it.
Want some payback. You want some payback.
And go ahead.
This might be the best result for the rest of the world. If Trump focuses on domestic war rather than foreign wars, maybe that'll give the rest of the world a break for a few years.
I have said, I think Trump wants to get out of some at least the major foreign entanglements, so he can focus on some of the things that he wants to do here, and some of those things including smiting his enemies, and that's for sure. And the name, so we will see. It's going to be interesting. There were people like, we're going to have a civil war, and I said, any civil war we have will look more like if you see what happened with the United Healthcare guy and how everybody was cheering online, right? People are kind of angry at the ruling elite. You might have noticed here, Mark. They're literally ready to break out the guillotines. So the fact that the working class are going to be fighting each other, oh no, the ruling elite, I think, got a message with this guy that is not who the American people are really pissed at.
I've always said that Trump is a chaos bomb. The only question is where that chaos bomb goes off. And if that chaos bomb goes off in Washington, D.C., well, then that's time to get some popcorn, a lawn chair, and watch it burn.
Yeah, well, and we got to get to there because let's face it, the neocons, it's obvious they wanted a war or something on the Korean Peninsula. They didn't get that, so they're up to no good. They're now threatening Maduro.
They're still trying to provoke Russia into launching missiles at U.S. military assets somewhere. The Biden administration is desperately trying, and the Russians are like, your ATACMS are wasp stings. Get out of here.
Yeah.
Latest Russian response wasn't even a response. It was just a normally scheduled, attack on the Kiev regime's electrical infrastructure. And they said, this is in response to the ATACMS, which is basically they're just dismissing the latest ATACMS as completely ineffective. So why should we bother really responding to it?
And they know what's going on because Trump came out. Now, I happen to know, and you may know too, because I was involved in some of it, that some people went to Congress and talked to some very high-ranking Republicans and a bunch of people and said, Trump's too quiet. He needs to say some things. Here's maybe some things he needs to say. And very shortly after, Trump came out and said, yeah, I'm opposed to this, blah, blah, similar to the things that were inferred. There's a lot going on. I'll put it like this. There's more going on behind the scenes than people know. And I know because I was involved in part of it.
Trump has to be careful because he can't let the Logan Act be resurrected as it was the first time. So he can't do any direct negotiations right now. But what he appears to be doing is talking to Viktor Orban, who is a NATO ally, technically, right, and a member of the West. And it appears that Orban may already be talking to Putin as kind of a go-between, because you can't really do anything about that. So that may be, but again, I simply don't think that whatever Trump, right? Everything Trump has suggested, ceasefire, European troops on the ground. If you don't agree to a ceasefire, we'll pump Ukraine full of weapons, all of this nonsense. Russia's not interested in it. We're just niet. No.
But I'll say this, because I actually had it with I was at dinner the other week with Colonel Larry Wilkerson, right? I was talking with him, and what he was basically saying was this. Not that he disagreed with anything here, right? But he talked about some things that happened during the Reagan administration and blah, blah, blah. And what he talked about was the importance of talking, that the danger is when you're not talking, the Biden administration said nobody's allowed to talk with the Russians. And he talked about some of the things that have happened in the past, that if there wasn't, a discussion could have went really, really bad. So I will say this. I'm not saying that they could get a deal. The Russians are winning, blah, blah, blah. But I think it will be such a more positive thing if there are people from Washington, D.C. saying, I'm going to go to Moscow, and Russia can sit down and say, look, this is what we think, and they can go back, and you open the channels of discussion, notwithstanding all the problems. I'm for that. You know what I mean, Mark?
I don't know. That could go one of two ways. That could go that way, right? Talking is good, dialogue, even if we don't agree. On the other hand, if Russia says no to Trump's deal, right, and it becomes clear that the Russian terms are something that even Trump can't agree, as American president can't agree to, that may force Trump to then take action in response, right? The old peace through strength. The neocons will all be whispering in his ear, if you want to de-escalate, you've got to escalate and show strength. It could bring things to a head where Trump is forced to take action.
But here's the reality, though. Here's a different part of that. If you don't know the reality of Ukraine, yes, the Trump people know. Did you read the op-ed from Trump Jr. and RFK Jr. a while back in Politico? The reality is this: there are people that are in Trump with in contact. They know the reality on the battlefield. They know so it's one thing if you're talking with people who are living in this fantasy narrative where there's a new wonder weapon and the Russians are fighting with shovels and there's North Koreans running all over the place and these incompetent, hapless, bungling Russians are short. That's one thing. But when you got people that know the truth, it changes the dynamics of what their choices and options are. Anyway, Mark, one last thing I want to ask you before we go, Mark. And that is, have you heard about Moldova? Apparently, the Ukrainians are cutting off their fuel.
I've heard of it. I've been.
Have you heard about the Ukrainians cutting off their fuel?
Yes.
And if you could comment on Romania also with what's going on there. But anyway,
Moldova is entirely dependent on Russian fuel, but they've just had reelected barely a president who is rabidly anti-Russian and pro-Western and wants to bring Moldova in. There's long been a hope that if Georgia can't be the second front against Russia, then Moldova could. Moldova has a separatist region, Transnistria, where there are Russian peacekeepers, but there's a limited contingent, and Russia doesn't have the ability to reinforce them or really do anything with them because they're separated by Ukraine. They also in Transnistria, in Moldova, the separatist region is one of the largest depots of Soviet arms and ammunition that was brought back from the Warsaw Pact. And the Kiev regime would love that, could fuel them for a year or two or more of high intensity conflict, right? With weapons that they actually know how to use and so forth, ammunition. Of course, I have to assume that the Russian troops there have it rigged to blow. But we don't know. But in any way, there's long been suggestion that if the conflict was going to expand anywhere immediately outside of Russian borders, it would be Moldova. And the Kiev regime right now is making a lot of noise. Syrskyi has been talking about another offensive, another suicidal offensive that they need again to break out of the box that they're in. And there's a few different places that they could launch this, right? And they have received equipment. The U.S. sent several hundred Strikers last month. Australia sent 50 old Abrams tanks. Germany sent more. And none of these things have appeared on the battlefield yet, which tells me that they're building up an offensive force again. Now, it could be in Moldova. It could be across the old Kakhovka reservoir towards the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. It could be into Belgorod region, or
what about
it could
Belarus?
be Bryansk. Belarus, maybe, but I think that's probably a can of worms that NATO doesn't want to open at this point. I don't think so. I think Belgorod, Bryansk, Moldova, or the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. And again, Moldova is definitely one of those. The presence of Russian nuclear weapons on that territory, and even I know Lukashenko isn't in charge of them, but even the idea that crazy Uncle might be in charge of an Oreshnik or nuclear weapons, that's got to make people in Europe nervous, which is exactly what it's intended to do. So, yeah, I don't think it's possible, but it would be fifth on that list, right? At the bottom, I would guess. So I think that's the least likely option, but it's still not outside the realm of possibility. So, but again, this will be another Kursk. It will be another suicidal offensive that will ultimately, just hasten the end, even if, it leads to ridiculous mainstream media info war celebration for 2 weeks, like Kursk did at the time until the cost of it became readily apparent. Russia will deal with it, and they won't take their boot off the neck, of Pokrovsk. They've already wrapped up essentially all of South Donbass at this point, except for Pokrovsk. And, the way things are going, they'll be moving by next summer on maybe even by spring on this last defensive line in the Donbass, this Kramatorsk, Slavyansk, Konstantinovka line. Is
that Seversk also?
What?
So was it Seversk, that one also?
Yes, Seversk too. Seversk is one holdout in the north, but Russia's pressing on that right now. I mean, Seversk is almost a sideshow at this point. Russia hasn't invested that much effort into it. Pokrovsk right now is more important, and I think moving on. And Russia also now has the ability past Pokrovsk to move essentially in operational space all the way to the Dnieper, west to the Dnieper, because there's no big urban area, no big fortifications, no topographical obstacles. It's all open steppe all the way from Pokrovsk to the banks of the Dnieper River. and that has people in Kiev and the West scared.
I think the Russians are going to pound the living daylights out of them from now until January 20th to set themselves up in a better position. I think they're just going to smack every. Why not? You got from now to January, just smack it. Why get distracted?
You're going to see nothing but Russian, battlefield escalation. They're going to push everywhere now to have more facts on the ground to make it harder for Trump to deny whenever he does come trying to sell whatever deal is cobbled together for him. Again, I don't place a lot of faith on that, but we'll see.
We shall see. That's right. We shall see. I'll put it like this. You got a group of lunatics in there who want more war. I would prefer somebody who says, I want a deal or I want less war, at least in that region between nuclear powers. Let's at least have that conversation. That's all I'm
one of the crazy warmongers. I want the Kiev regime gone. I want it completely gone. I don't want any remnant of it, no rump state. I want it completely rooted out of Kiev, Lvov, however far you have to go to get rid of it. And anything that interrupts that, I think would be against Russia's long-term national interest right now.
Yeah, well, I think Zelensky.
Anyone who doesn't like fascists.
Yeah, I think Zelensky, to be frank, I think he's planning his exit. And I wouldn't be shocked if by January 20th that Zelensky and his so-called inner circle, that those guys get the hell out of there. My prediction right now is if I know, look, I don't put anything past these people. If Trump makes it in, hopefully he does. And not that I'm a Trump fan, but I mean, he won and that should be what happens, right? I think Zelensky makes a run for it. Maybe I'm wrong. So take that prediction. That's a prediction we're going with. Garland has said somehow as we get close to January 20th, he's going to be like, remember the guy Ashraf Ghani in Afghanistan that was taken off and there was like suitcases of money falling out of his car and his helicopter and stuff that's going to be him.
I hope not. And I don't think so, but also I hope not, because I think Russia is perfectly happy with a unhinged, unstrategic or military-minded Zelensky, a comedian in charge of the country, vice, say, I don't know, an actual military commander like Zaluzhny, who is also, by the way, a committed Banderite, an ideological Banderite, right? So anyone else that Zelensky could be replaced with would probably be worse. So I think actually Russia, one of the reasons Russia hasn't reached out and tapped him is because any alternative to Zelensky would be better probably for the effort than he is.
Yeah, I said that about Biden. I said, man, he's got the best insurance policy ever. He's got Kamala Harris, and then people were like, oh, that. And then ultimately, it turned out to be exact.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother story. Anyway, Mark, where can everybody find your important work online?
Yeah, on Twitter, X at Mark Sleboda 1, or on Telegram or Substack at The Real Politik with Mark Sleboda.
Sounds like a winner. All right, Mark, we will talk again soon. And before you know it, man, we'll be talking about elections in Germany and God knows what's going on all over Europe. So, all right, talk to you soon. And thanks a lot. We'll get together again next week. I'm sure there'll be something going on that we'll talk about.
Thanks for having me. Always an honor and a pleasure. Have a good weekend.
All right. Thanks a lot. See you later. Everybody, don't forget to share this on all your social media platforms. Mark and I are out. All right.